introduction to the arts was a gift. My mother said that when I was a little kid, I always played with clay, and I was a shaper. And I always had the knack for, it was like being a gift of music. If you're a musician, you're born with a certain something inside you, like a semilla that says that you follow that passion. Well, mine was this, without knowing it. My name is Roman Villarreal, and we're at 9-3 Studios in South Chicago. I'm a sculptor by profession, that's my main thing. But I'm also a painter. Our main thing here in South Chicago was the steel mills. They were the bread and butter of this community and the lifeblood of everything, that was going on. They existed, I think, in here since the 30s. My personal thing with this is when my parents came, my parents were farm workers. And they were working in the fields, I think somewhere north of here. It could have been Wisconsin or Michigan, I'm not exactly sure. They heard through the grapevine that there was a call for workers because the mills was on strike. So my father, his brothers, and a few other people that were all together came here and got hired on as laborers in the steel mill. But little did they know they were strike breakers, They didn't know that. So they brought them into the mill and they were doing all the labor work they were supposed to do. But they were very fortunate because a lot of time when you're a strike breaker, you don't get hired back. They were fortunate enough that after the strike ended, they kept them. So they were able to continue working there. My father was there for 30-some years working in the mill. What's interesting about this community, as small as it was racially divided. I just talked about this subject to somebody just the other day. We were at a function, and they were talking about South Chicago, and I was telling them how there was a black section, Mexican, and then once you crossed Commercial Avenue, you were middle class, and that was predominantly white. But to me, it was interesting the way everybody was divided. Like certain parts of the community were basically Croatian over here. The east side was basically Serbian, Poles. The Terraza, we had Commercial Avenue, Houston, the Wooden Building. And the black community had the ones closest to the mill that was called the Mill Gate. Because I went into the military 68, 70. And during that period, we were growing up in here in South Chicago, all the issues that were going on in the Southwest and California, they didn't affect us because we were too diverse. In other words, California, because that was more raza together, their issues were totally different from ours. But we never knew what was going on until we left the neighborhood. So when we went into the military, it was not just being in the military, we opened up the door for us to understand what was going on in the big picture. My first experience with Chicanos, I was in Fort Leavenworth, Missouri, basic training, and these two Chicanos at the time, or Latinos, were having an argument. So my white friends that were sitting around me kept asking, well, what did he say? And I said, well, he said this. And they go, what did he say? He said this. And somebody goes like this to me. Come here, man, we want to talk to you. He goes, where are you from? I said, well, Chicago. Raza, don't. He started running me to this rap that I never knew nothing about. Well, it was through these brothers from California that I became a Chicano. It was an education on what was the big picture, because a lot of us didn't even know there was a war going on, let alone the issues that were being affected our people in the Southwest, the farm workers, because we didn't even watch TV in those days. We were a bit too much, because when you grew up in the morning and here in South Chicago or as a kid in the 50s, you were just told one thing: go outside and play. You didn't have to come home until after the sun went down, and nobody bothered to ask you what you did, what you were doing, nothing. Because the neighborhoods were safe enough for us to be gone all day and nobody would ever question it. See, during that period, before the 90s and all that happened, the mills closed. When the mills closed, that's when everything changed for everybody. Alcoholism, drugs, divorces, depression, all these things that were not there because we were almost middle class. It was funny. I always laugh about it because when we were almost started to buy cars, people were starting to buy homes, and during that period, after the mills closed, they took it away from you. When you bought yourself a new car, they got repossessed. People who had just bought a home, the mortgage people took it. So it was a rough period for all of us during that period. But very few choices were given to us at that time. So mistakes were made. We stepped into the black market, the underground and all that. And bad enough, you were an unemployed steel worker with minimal amount of education. Now be an unemployed steel worker with a criminal record. But what we didn't realize until years and years later when we started talking amongst ourselves, because what happened to a lot of us, we didn't talk about it, because it was our fault, we got involved in this crazy stuff, this and that, but we didn't know that we were surviving. and you were doing hook or crook, whatever it was to feed your family, to make sure you could stay alive and all that. And it happened to a lot of us. Well, I witnessed it through the eyes of an artist because that time I was already starting to pay more attention to our community. So a lot of the early things that happened during that period came out in my art. My early works were basically done in, the first materials I started working with was wood. And then slowly I started going into stone, and then I started experimenting more and more and more. So I finally, through being self-taught, I taught myself all the different styles, and I did a lot of reading, a lot of history. And it was funny for me because I would go to, full of knowledge about art, right? Try going to a neighborhood bar and talk about Dadaism or Cubism. They would look at you like, what are you, a nut? Because nobody had that interest. I'll never forget the time that I told my father that I was going to go to the Art Institute. I just got out the military and we had the GI loan, so I figured, hey, why not? I always wanted to be that artist, right? Man, my old man looked at me and said, what are you, nuts? How are you going to feed your family? Because I already had children at that time. And because college and those kind of things were not the norm for us over here. Ours was steel, was carpenters, iron workers, electricians, the trades. That was education, not college. Well, my introduction to the arts was a gift. My mother said that when I was a little kid, I always played with clay, and I was a shaper. And I always had the knack for, it was like being a gift of music. If you're a musician, you're born with a certain something inside you, like a semilla that says that and you follow that passion. Well, mine was this, without knowing it. How it became part of my life was when the mills closed and we had to start making decisions about the future. So after all this happened to me, I said, wow, forget it. I'm going to be the master of my own fate, hook or crook. And I was able to get to the first base, second base, and got to the level where I could support my children and myself as an artist. We used to work every single festival, fair, within a certain radius. Every weekend we were working somewhere to make that extra money. Because we always made something. We hardly went to a fair where we didn't make any money. Because at that time people were, well, it was reasonable. We weren't charging, hundreds of thousands of dollars like it is now. So we were surviving, but through the arts. What's interesting about the east side of Chicago, it's really because of our history. We were the first Hispanic community. We hold a title to a lot of things, but for some strange reason, we're not included in a lot of things that happen over there. Because a lot of the artists that came out of here was Francisco Mendoza, his brother Vince. And the early years we had a lot of older fellow artists that didn't make it successfully, but they were producing work, And that's what's interesting about here, because we had every genre of music that from the beginning of big bands, all that, South Chicago had them. But only South Chicago. Like for instance, this festival that I just mentioned to you earlier, the Nest Fest that just happened recently at the Crowbar Lounge. This was a perfect example of South Chicago to see the cream of the crop of the South Chicago. Because the musicians, the poets, the vendors, everybody there from there, it's all from the southeast side. And that was the only time that you will ever see that grouping of people in one place and see to what caliber they're at, especially in the music, So it's one thing that we're being able to be proud of, the art movement that's going on in our community. Oh no, we don't waste nothing. That's the one thing about being an artist, there's almost nothing you can't work with. And that's the beauty of being an outside artist, because see, a lot of techniques that you learn, they frown upon in education. In other words, you don't work with this material, you don't mix this with this. They try to make you not use black. There's a lot of things that you learn when you go into school that they frown upon. But when you're an outside artist learning, you use everything and anything until you figure out, this work, that don't work, this work, that don't work. Let's try that as an artist, is to get to know who Roman Villarreal is, the one, That's always the main one. Now, the other one is, am I going to make any money? Well, that cannot be part of the reason why you're doing this, because yes, you're going to make money, but you can't make that the priority. It's because it's not going to work, because a lot of times you put yourself, I think I'm going to make $10,000. Oh yeah? Try it, But the most important thing is that we're here and we're showing the world that we exist as artists.